Good morning. We're gathered here on the territory of the signatories to Treaty 7, and I'd like to acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta who share a deep connection and history with this land. I'm Kathleen Ganley, the Alberta NDP Energy Critic, and thank you for joining me here today. Sunday marked 1 month since the UCP announced their 7-month moratorium on renewable energy projects in the province of Alberta. The moratorium came without warning or consultation. It has put 24,000 jobs and $33 billion in investment at risk. Danielle Smith and the UCP pulled the rug out from under the fastest growing renewable sector in the country. This move creates uncertainty and it drives away investments and jobs. Albertans and renewable energy companies have not been happy with the sector being shut down. But you don't have to take our word for it. Today, I'm going to show you some damning feedback from job creators and investors by companies that have been operating in Alberta for decades and companies that were considering investing here for the very first time. This feedback is stakeholder submissions provided to the Alberta Utilities Commission since the moratorium was issued. All of these submissions are public and we will provide a link to them in our news release today. I'm now going to walk you through some of the most devastating criticisms of the UCP's incredibly harmful moratorium. Let's start with NUE Corp, a large-scale utility solar installation contractor. This corporation wrote, quote, "The proposed inquiry jeopardizes the significant pre-construction development capital already invested by NUE and all project developers in Alberta. If the proposed hiatus is implemented, investment dollars spent on identification and de-risking of projects before entering the AUC's regulatory process could leave the province." They then go on to say, quote, "Unfortunately, the proposed moratorium risks diverting our resources away from Alberta and towards more predictable jurisdictions, compromising both our investment and the province's economic growth." This is a company making massive investments, warning that these investments and jobs will go elsewhere. Next, SPWC Development Group, a subsidiary of Algonquin Power, which operates renewable projects across North America and is developing a 200 megawatt wind farm in Alberta, submitted the following, quote, "Almost 7 months of unplanned and unprecedented pause implemented by the Alberta government will have significant negative implications on the proposed project and overall investment and development confidence in Alberta." They say this includes canceling or delaying a $460 million planned investment, delayed financial benefits to landowners from municipalities, and potential project cost increases that could impact the financial viability of the project. All of this is incredibly bad for the Alberta economy. Starlight Energy was planning to submit multiple applications to the AUC in the next 3 months. They have projects around the world totaling $3.7 billion. They wrote that the 7-month ban, quote, "has unfortunately led us to question whether our assumption that Alberta's business-friendly environment still holds true. And this may have negative consequences in our decision to increase the company's investment appetite for the province." McCain Foods is looking for a renewable power source for their Coaldale plant. They wrote that, quote, "Ultimately, such an abrupt stop to project applications is very detrimental to regulatory certainty. The president of the board of directors of Peace Energy Cooperative, which was planning to build a solar farm near Peace River, wrote, quote, "The moratorium will cause the loss of thousands of jobs, increased electricity costs, increasing rates for consumers, disrupt investment, and hobble projects which productively and safely begin to address the climate crisis we are all facing." Dunmore Solar is building a solar project in Cypress County. Their parent company is based in Israel. They said, quote, Such an arbitrary change to regulation does not reflect a stable investment climate that attracts development and construction investors and lenders and makes the province and international jurisdiction, makes other provinces and international jurisdictions more appealing. Pathfinder Clear Energy, which is based in the UK, has projects in multiple countries, said, quote, "We hold very grave concern with the implementation and industry-wide pause on development and the potential negative investment climate this will instill in Alberta's renewable generation industry." ARA is a company with projects in Alberta that recently opened an office in Calgary. They are owned by Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners, which describes itself as the world's largest investment firm and owns $20 billion in projects around the world. AREA was planning a $1 billion solar farm in the county of 40 Mile that would create between 800 and 1,000 construction jobs. They had already gone through the public hearing process and write that they were the furthest along in the AUC process before the ban was announced. They believe that, quote, "The regulatory delay places undue burden on project economics, placing investment and jobs in jeopardy. This is a $1 billion project that would create up to 1,000 jobs. It's put at risk by the UCP." They go on to say, quote, they have, quote, "expended a significant amount of time, effort, and capital to progress the project to this point in accordance with the laws and policies currently in existence. Further delay and uncertainty related to the pause could jeopardize the project and all of the benefits it will bring to Alberta, both economic and environmental." Finally, Renewable Energy Systems, which has been in business for 40 years and describes itself as the world's largest independent renewable energy company, said, quote, "The moratorium will result in severe uncertainty among investors, jeopardizing billions of dollars in investment in Alberta." They go on to say the moratorium, quote, "will create significant negative outcomes as a total moratorium on approvals with no warning or discussion with stakeholders causes disruption to in-flight projects worth billions of dollars." All of the above quotes basically amount to the same thing. The UCP's renewable moratorium is creating massive investment uncertainty in renewables, but also throughout the Alberta economy. It's driving away investment, and that means Alberta is losing jobs. That's not me saying it. It's taken directly from companies impacted by the UCP's moratorium. Albertans will lose their jobs as a result of this decision, and all the Premier has for them is a shrug. Multi-billion-dollar international companies can easily take jobs and investment elsewhere if they think it's too risky to invest in Alberta. Fortunately, the solution is simple. If we want to restore our reputation as a place to invest and do business, the UCP must end their moratorium on renewables today. My message today for the UCP is simple. The evidence is clear. The moratorium was a bad decision. It is harming Alberta's reputation and it is costing us jobs. Do the right thing and reverse it today. Thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Okay, we'll start with questions in person and then go online. Okay, no questions in person, so we'll go to questions on the line. Just a reminder, if you're joining by Zoom, to use the raise hand function, and if you're joining by phone, to press *9 to be put in the queue. Okay, our first question goes to Elise Von Schiel. Go ahead, Elise, your line is open. Elise, you can start talking, your line should be open now.
Okay. Yeah, so I just wanted to follow up because I know you guys have talked a lot about the impacts on business, and some of the other submissions to the AUC came from landowners who agree with the pause, or at least what it's trying to do. So I guess my question is, if you're balancing those two things, landowners who see this as necessary in some form, and businesses who are upset by it, like how would the NDP tackle this, understanding that there needs to be something to address end of life for projects, but obviously you guys disagree with what the government has decided to do here?
Yeah, so governments actually review regulations all the time. You know, the world progresses and the law has to progress with it. You know, we probably did hundreds of regulatory reviews while we were in government. We never once shut down an entire industry to do it. This is really unprecedented. We're not saying that the concerns shouldn't be addressed. We're not saying there shouldn't be some sort of review even. What we're saying is that this is an unprecedented and unusual move. The government has come in and stopped all investment in this area, and I mean, this is having an impact on renewables, but it also has an impact on investment more generally. When investors are looking for places to take their money, they look at the legal framework in a jurisdiction to see if it is a stable, sort of mature legal jurisdiction, because if it's not, the rules can change suddenly. Well, that's exactly what the UCP had done. They have changed the rules suddenly and without warning, putting at risk a whole bunch of people's investments and capital. And that, I mean, that's going to have long-term effects. So yes, I think they should address concerns, but they didn't need to do it like this.
Is there a follow-up, Elise?
Yeah, just wondering, I guess, kind of along those lines, we'll hear more when the review is done, but at this juncture, like, what would that proper policy look like to you to address the viewscapes, the agricultural land, and the end of life for projects?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways they could sort of look at that. You know, certainly sort of security in terms of end of life is a possibility. I would note that that's not what we do for oil and gas, so they're not required to put down that kind of security. We use the Orphan Well Association instead. You know, I think there's an open question on why you would treat one energy industry differently than the other. You know, I think you can develop those rules. I just don't think it's necessary to kind of ban investment. And I really do think that this is an ideological move on behalf of a government. I mean, many of their supposed reasons and excuses are verifiably false, or some of them are even misinformation about the electrical grid. So, yeah, overall, I don't think that this was necessary. I think it's possible to address concerns without it. And I also think it's worth noting that a lot of landowners are actually in favor of renewables. Like, renewables aren't forced onto anyone's land. These are landowners contracting with their private property to have development on that private property. It's their choice. They chose to do it. And so while there may be, you know, other neighbors nearby that are concerned, I think there's also a lot of landowners that are in support.
Any other questions, Elise?
No, that's it. Thanks, guys.
All right, we'll do another pass for questions on the line. Go ahead, Bob Weber.
Okay, am I live?
You sure are.
Excellent. Ms. Ganley, I'm wondering if you've seen the information requests that the Alberta Utilities Commission released yesterday, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on whether they have added to or reduced some of the uncertainty around this moratorium.
Are those the interim rules they came out with?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a situation like this, interim rules aren't very helpful. The point of legal rules is to create certainty, so investors can sort of calculate what the risk reward is. Interim rules don't create certainty because you don't know whether they're going to change or whether that's even the direction that the government is going to move in. I mean, to date, we've never really heard the reason why the UCP brought in this moratorium. We've heard a lot of explanations, all of which have been verifiably false. So I don't think that creates a lot of certainty for investors. They kind of, I would say, lack clarity to a certain degree. We're obviously still consulting with industry in terms of, how they're responding to it and how they're feeling about it, because it's fairly recent development. But I don't think they create the necessary certainty, and I don't think they're going to help much.
Is there a follow-up, Bob?
Quickly, can you send around some links to the various quotes that you used at the opening of this gathering here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are actually linked in our news release, but I will double check.
Oh, okay. Well, great. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll do one more pass for a question online. Oh, here we go. Go ahead, caller, your line is open. Oh, sorry, caller. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi there. I think I figured it out. I spoke with a developer yesterday, who has a project that's caught in late stages. Now, this is going ahead, and he's not sure what the effect of the rule will be, what he'll have to submit at the end of this, because it's going to a hearing. And I also have other he would like to see some action on this. We have other people who say that, there's no point in having these hearings because, there's going to be potentially another hearing will have to happen under new information. What would be the cost, what's the cost benefit here? I know you're calling for a complete end to the moratorium until this happens, but what do we suspect the cost is? I mean, projects that are proposed could go ahead in a year with a little more money, or 2 years with a little bit more money. What would be the interim costs for these projects to be in limbo?
I think it's hard to predict the exact in-current term costs. I know the calculations that have been run in terms of like what's at risk are about $33 billion in investment and 24,000 jobs. So that's significant. Will some of those projects go ahead? It's possible that they'll go ahead in 7 months, but 7 months is a long time. This is a rapidly developing industry. 7 months could change the economics significantly. We don't know whether those projects will go ahead. And even if after 7 months the rules are settled, we still don't know if the projects will go ahead, because investors are going to be looking at that. They're going to be looking at the sudden change in the rules, which is really unprecedented in the province. And they're going to be saying, is this a jurisdiction where I want to invest? What if they do this again, right? There's been no justification provided for, this heavy-handed of a reaction on the part of the government. So, I think we know what's potentially at risk. We don't know what's going to happen going forward. And even the cost of, submitting your project and going through regulatory, these things have costs associated with them. So if people have to go through regulatory, go through a hearing, hire people to come in, and then it turns out that the rules change again, they have to go through another hearing, that's potentially increasing the costs too. So I don't see any of that as helpful.
Is there a follow-up?
Hi there. Just a quick follow-up on another topic. It's not a follow-up, but I'm wondering if you've seen what's happening with utility prices in Medicine Hat. The city has basically rejected RRO pricing as its own price-setting method, and we've heard for some time that there's going to be a discussion about the RRO system. Where's that at? And I think where is the rest of the province at in terms of electrical prices right now?
I can't speak to Medicine Hat specifically, and I can't speak to what the government will ultimately do with the RRO. I know they have talked about looking at the RRO. I think what we do know is that prices throughout the province, RRO prices at least, are skyrocketing currently. There's been a lot of analysis published that indicates that a lot of that skyrocketing is actually due to something which is totally illegal in our system, I want to be clear, but it's called economic withholding. So because sort of large incumbent generators have they have kind of a monopoly, they can kind of adjust the price, shall we say, to suit their needs. And that is having a big impact in our system. I think, in terms of the ban today, which will keep renewable power, one of the cheapest sources of power on our grid, off the grid, that just gives folks more power to do that economic withholding. And that just results in higher prices for consumers.
Are there any other questions?
No, thanks.
Okay, with no other questions, that's all for today.
Awesome. Thanks very much.